While I play many anime-style games, you might be shocked to hear I've never really watched anime. It comes up a lot on my streams. Someone comes in all excited about their new obsession, or maybe they're just curious which ones I've loved in the past. And considering how much time I spend playing Genshin and WuWa, Star Rail and several others with similar aesthetics, it always feels a little odd that I have to admit to never getting into it. It's about time we fix that, but I'm going to need your help. I have watched 2 series from start to finish, but that's the sum total of my exposure to actual anime. If you've seen any of my videos about the quests in the games I play, you'll know just how important stories are to me. I love books, films, TV and narrative games, and animation is actually one of my favorite mediums. I'm pretty sure there's tons of anime out there which I'd completely fall in love with. The problem? There's so much to try that I can't figure out where to start. So here's the plan. In this video, I'm going to talk briefly about some of the stories I've absolutely loved in other mediums and highlight what stands out to me about each of them. And I'll also share my overall feelings about those 2 I've watched previously. And with that, hopefully, you'll be able to come up with some suggestions which really deserve to be at the top of my list. And if people are interested, I'll share my anime journey with you in the future videos. While I'd love to just list out my favourites and ask for something similar, that video would take far too long and my list would be far too varied to be of use. I have an IMDb account which I've been using to rate films and TV for a few years now, and even though it's pretty rare that I remember to actually log in and rate things most of the time, I still have almost 1,300 ratings stored on there. That's a small fraction of the things I've watched. I'm even worse at remembering to rate books on Goodreads, and even there I've got over 300, even though I only started tracking my reading much later on. I'm also the type of person who loves to reread, rewatch or replay my favourites. The best stories change the way you see the world, and the same story seen from a different perspective can be just as compelling as it was the first time around. I'm functionally unable to pick a small number of favourites, so I'm going to have to go for themes and trends instead, and pick 1 or 2 from each as an example. We'll start with animation, and I guess the most natural starting point is that emotion is the most important part of a story to me. I grew up obsessed with all the Disney classics and other Western animations like The Land Before Time or An American Tail, and while I loved the animation, the music and the magic of it all of that would have been for nothing if the stories hadn't left me in tears countless times. There are too many examples to cover, of course, but one which has always been special to me is The Fox and the Hound. For anyone unfamiliar, this is a story about the loss of innocence, the inevitability of change, the loneliness of setting out into the world alone, and the deep sense of betrayal when someone you once considered your closest friend becomes a person you can no longer accept. My absolute first requirement for any story is for it to make me care. If it can break my heart along the way, then all the better. And naturally, I love Studio Ghibli, and I've watched almost every one of their films multiple times, though I have to admit that Grave of the Fireflies is one of the best movies that I never need to see again in my life. Cataloguing why these films are special would take an entire channel's worth of videos. The beauty and the craftsmanship, the memorable and complex characters, the deep and relatable emotions which underpin their fantastical plots, and of course that surreal feeling where it's almost like you're watching someone else's dreams. I can never get enough. But one thing which always stands out the most is their reverence for moments of quiet. So many stories speed you on your way from one scene to the next, and even when there's a moment of reflection, there's something calculated about it. I adore the moments in Ghibli films where everything stands still, and you can soak up the ambience of everyday life, or appreciate natural beauty, or just take a few seconds to simply exist in the gorgeous world that they created and reflect on the journey so far. Of course, I can enjoy films which don't do this, but these moments of rest truly elevate the story as a whole. And thanks to my love for Ghibli, I branched out into the wonderful world of Eastern animation too, which gets far too little attention in the West. There are perhaps more of these which I haven't watched yet than some of the other categories, but there are still many that I love. The ones I keep coming back to range from grounded stories like A Silent Voice to the more fantastical like The Girl Who Leapt Through Time. Directors like Mamoru Hosoda and Makoto Shinkai really stand out. One which deserves a special mention for being near perfect for me is Your Name, with its beautiful blend of fantasy intruding into the everyday life of relatable and nuanced characters, and a slow escalation towards an action-packed and emotionally fraught finale with a satisfying and moving ending. And of course, the animation is just stunning. More like that and I'd be a very happy Saurus. And along those lines, a studio which is criminally underrated is Cartoon Saloon. In many ways, they're the closest thing I've found to Studio Ghibli. The 3 films that I consider their masterpieces so far are all quiet, personal stories steeped in Irish folklore and magic, with animation and music which is utterly mesmerizing. My favorite of the three is Song of the Sea, which is a beautiful exploration of the pain of childhood loss, the poignant mix of hate and love unique to sibling bonds, myth and memory and the metaphors we use to understand the world, and how to find a balance between moving on and remembrance. And of course, that melancholy backdrop of a culture leaving its vibrant past behind and moving into a modern world which lacks that special magic. Though of course, nothing quite tops that one transcendent scene from Wolfwalkers. If you've watched it, you know the one I mean. And the last category I'll mention here is that new evolution of Western animation sparked by the absolute masterpiece that is Into the Spider-Verse. While I adore many of the Disney, Pixar and DreamWorks films of the past couple of decades, I think it's pretty clear that Spider-Verse shocked the mainstream Western animation industry out of a bit of a rut. It embraced the fact that animation is art, and every single frame was carefully crafted to emphasize the story through the medium itself, which really stood out from the signature style which all the other studios had been recycling for years. And yet, at its heart, it's another superhero origin story, which emphasizes one of the things I often think about. People often talk about cliches as if their use automatically means that a story has nothing new to say, but in my experience, cliches are what they are because they mean something to people, and stories which can take familiar ingredients and present them with heart and soul and a fresh perspective often end up being the most cherished. Despite the incessant clamor for something new to catch the attention, I am just as excited for anything like this as well. For live-action films, I have an even bigger problem since there are literally hundreds I've enjoyed enough to rate at 8 out of 10 or higher. But looking at my list, I do see some common themes amongst many of the ones I've enjoyed the most. These will be even more general and obviously aren't absolute requirements for me to enjoy something, they're just stories which resonate with me more than most. First, triumph over adversity, where even normal people show resilience, courage and strength of purpose overcoming immense odds. Many of these are based on true stories. Spotlight is a particular favourite, or Just Mercy, or 12 Years a Slave, though just as many are not. These are at their best when they give an honest accounting of the adversity. For example, one I've always loved is Saving Private Ryan, which doesn't shy away from showing the toll war takes, the pointlessness, the grief and pain and trauma, and yet, by the end it leaves you with a deep appreciation for heroism, sacrifice, and the drive to find at least some meaning amidst the chaos. The world we live in is fractious. Stories which acknowledge that and still manage to inspire hope will always strike a chord. On the other hand, I also love films which dive deep into the darker side of things even without that attempt at leaving us with a sense of hope at the end. Whether that's dark humor in films like The Banshees of Inisherin or Sweeney Todd, or just outright nihilism in Joker, Fight Club or Seven, I can enjoy these ones just as much. Nightcrawler is a fantastic example of this archetype. Jake Gyllenhaal's performance is both disturbing and compelling as he plays a freelance videographer who prowls the LA night filming accidents and crime scenes in the hopes of selling the footage to local news stations. The ever-increasing lengths he goes to get that killer shot reveals his utter lack of empathy, and as he coldly manipulates those around him, it's impossible to look away. And even without that underlying darkness, I love thought-provoking stories that question reality, time, identity, and so on. Films like Memento, Predestination, Inception, The Matrix, Interstellar, The Prestige, and many more. The big downside to many of these is that they often focus just a little too much on their big idea, and the characters get little less focus as a result. The handful which couple those thought-provoking ideas with memorable characters really stand out. For example, The Truman Show is incredible at both. One which I often think about is Gattaca. It's a sci-fi set in a world split between the genetically modified elite and the underclass of natural-born people, and it could so easily have fallen into that trap. Instead, the story has so much soul. The protagonist was born naturally, but dreams of traveling the stars despite being blocked from jobs due to his inferior genetics. He borrows someone else's DNA so he can pass the test and join the space program, and despite his perceived handicaps, his dedication leads him to excel. Though he is forever on the verge of being discovered, since even one stray eyelash could give the game away. It explores that fascinating dystopia from a very personal perspective, and it embodies that triumph over adversity theme. I've rewatched this film so many times and it never gets old. And of course, films centered on human connections are often just as meaningful for me. Ones about love, heartbreak, and the fragile beauty of companionship in an imperfect world. My favourites often have shades of sci-fi or fantasy too. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind or Never Let Me Go, for example, though more grounded tragic romances like The Notebook or The Fault in Our Stars can absolutely break my heart as well. A great example of this is Everything Everywhere All at Once, which somehow manages to show us an endless kaleidoscope of utter absurdity, deconstruct everything until the utter pointlessness of existence itself is laid bare, and then bring it back together with the heartfelt, uplifting message that in a cold, harsh universe where nothing really matters and everything is imperfect, we can choose to love each other anyway and make those connections become the meaning of our lives. Finally, the common thread across many of my favourite films is that I do still love a simple, honest epic with high stakes and big moral conflicts. I can enjoy even the more shallow ones, but once again, the stories which reach the top of the list for me have a deeply personal soul. Gladiators focus on revenge for loved ones lost, Dune's deconstruction of the myth of the hero, The Dark Knight's conflict between chaos and justice, embodied in its two main characters. Unique amongst these has to be The Lord of the Rings, which are undeniably some of the best films ever made. There's a sincerity to these films which I feel is often missing from modern blockbusters, a desire to tell the story at hand with as much of the soul intact as possible. Fourth wall breaks and self-aware quips can be fun too, but I can't help but find that it gets a little tiring in the long run, and something which is unapologetically genuine is often far more satisfying. When it comes to games, I'll focus on my absolute favourites, since here, at least, little else compares. Red Dead Redemption 2 is unparalleled in so many ways, exploring loyalty and betrayal, nature versus civilization, the death of a way of life, and the indifference of the future to what those left behind have lost, and so much more. But its true heart is the central question of Arthur Morgan's story. Is your life defined by your worst deeds, or is there a way to find redemption? Arthur is a complex and fascinating character. He is in no way a good person, even when you make the honourable choices throughout the story, and he lives his life weighed down with regret. The game puts you viscerally in his shoes. You kinda want to not go along with Dutch's plans as everything goes off the rails, but their fate is inevitable. This game actually did not appeal to me when I first saw it. While I'll gladly watch a western, they're far from my favourite genre, and when my partner wanted it for his birthday, I just shrugged and said whatever. Within a couple of hours, I was completely hooked. A compelling character can suck me in no matter what the context, and the more immersed I get, the more I love it anyway. My other favourite is Horizon Zero Dawn, another which I thought looked a little weird at first glance. Robot dinosaurs? How could that make sense? But it absolutely nailed it with fantastic world building and a story exploring the power of knowledge, the conflict between humanity, nature and technology, not to mention some very concerning real-world parallels in the lore of the world which you slowly uncover. There are far too many Ted Faros in the world right now. But what made me so attached to it, again, was Aloy's personal story. She was an outcast, pushed to the very edge of her society through no fault of her own, fought her way through grit and determination, and then her thirst for knowledge and understanding drove her out into the wider world in search of answers, where she eventually saved everyone from certain doom. Since my channel so far has been very focused on Genshin and Wuthering Waves, it would feel weird to ignore them completely. As much as I love them in their own way, they unfortunately do not belong in this list. I've detailed my problems with Genshin storytelling in great detail in past videos, if you're curious, and WuWa unfortunately has many of the same issues. They do have some absolutely fantastic moments where the story shows just how good it could have been, but they're disappointing overall. Since version 2, WuWa storytelling has kicked up several gears, so I'm hopeful it'll continue improving, while for Genshin, we'll just have to see whether Hoyo can actually change their ways in the future. And let's just ignore the storytelling in Star Rail. When it comes to books, while there are a ridiculously wide variety that I've loved, a handful actually do stand out for me. Robin Hobb's Realm of the Elderlings has to get the first mention. Fitz and the Fool are amongst the best characters ever written, and even side characters who feel inconsequential at first have such subtleties that spread over time until they're just as deep and beloved as even the central characters in most other stories. These books are filled with darkness and depression, and Fitz often acts like an idiot in the most frustratingly believable and realistic ways you can imagine. After all, at first he's an oblivious and headstrong boy, and he grows into a stubborn and reclusive man. But even at their worst, it always feels like there's a flash of beauty in the world, and a ray of hope worth reaching for. The other major standout is Brandon Sanderson, whose characters often feel a little less polished than my other favourites, but who more than makes up for it with his engaging magic, incredible world building, and the customary Sanderlange plots where everything collides in the most satisfying way at the end of each book. Take the most obvious detail of the world of his Stormlight archives, for example. Roshar is battered by periodic ice storms which rage with the strength of hurricanes from one end of the continent to the other every few weeks. The storms shape the landscape, the plants and animals which live there, and even the cultures which manage to survive and thrive in the face of the endless devastation. This one idea sparked thousands of facets and nuances to the world Sanderson built, and shaped the story from start to finish. I love world building like that, where the consequences of one simple change are truly explored and explained in such fascinating ways. Or for something which is completely different, one far more obscure series which I think is absolutely fantastic is The Tales of the Ketty J by Chris Wooding. These start off as just pure fun and steadily build up more depth and breadth to the characters and their relationships while ramping up the scope of the conflict until by the final book it's easily amongst the best I've ever read. The way I'd describe the experience is that it's like someone took the best parts of Pirates of the Caribbean, Star Wars and Indiana Jones and threw them into a melting pot with a dash of demon magic to add some spice. They are criminally underrated. The other one which makes the cut is Lies of Locke Lamora, which again has utterly compelling characters, this time in a fascinating and corrupt Venice-inspired city filled with crime and intrigue. Locke and his crew are brazen con artists who pull elaborate scams on corrupt nobles while trying to stay one step ahead of the rival gangs in the city's brutal underworld, as the shadowy powers that actually run the city slowly begin to take notice. Absolutely fantastic from start to finish. My shelves are filled with fantasy, sci-fi and other books which are all amazing in their own way, but these few somehow found their way to stand out, and for completely different reasons in each case. I've left TV for last because it's the medium I've most often found underwhelming. I feel it's rare for series to maintain high quality from start to finish. For example, the season 1 of Heroes and The Mandalorian were both brilliant, but both shows disappointed after such a promising start. Others, like Grey's Anatomy or The Walking Dead, had me hooked on their first 4 or 5 seasons, but then they just kept going and going and going. And there's always Lost, which was one of the best TV shows I've ever watched, filled with compelling mysteries and absolutely phenomenal characters, up until some indefinable point partway through where it became clear just how empty J.J. Abrams' mystery boxes actually were. Life is simply too short to sink time into shows which get good after series 3 or whatever, and conversely, many that I loved at first left me underwhelmed in the long run. I don't expect perfection, but I'd also prefer not to waste my time. One thing which I have found to be consistently done well across several shows is a fusion of mystery and dystopia. Squid Game, for example, is a compelling commentary on modern capitalist societies, while others like Silo or Pantheon explore speculative ideas and situations from a very human and personal perspective. Probably the best at this right now is Severance, which introduces a unique and unnerving sci-fi idea and just takes that concept further and further with every passing episode, exploring the moral and philosophical questions it poses in utterly riveting detail, while at the same time the cast of characters are just as compelling as the premise, and ironically feel like real people put into this crazy situation. I love a good mystery and I often enjoy dystopias. The combination of the two can be so engrossing. One thing I crave is stories which explore interesting themes from a variety of perspectives while still giving each character a satisfying and meaningful arc, and tying them all together in a web of realistic relationships. You can sometimes get this from books and occasionally from games, but while TV has the space to do it too, it's disappointingly rare. Arcane is an absolute masterpiece which hits the spot on pretty much every level. The world, the characters, the plot, the action, the animation, the music. It's one of those things which makes everything else look like a pale shadow in comparison. As much as I hate the hangover you feel after experiencing something that good, please give me more. And finally, as something a little out of left field, Downton Abbey. It's a period drama set in a stately manor in the Yorkshire countryside, which follows the lives of the aristocratic family who live in the splendour of the house, and the staff of working-class servants who toil from dawn to dusk behind the scenes. As with all the others, the characters are the thing which kept me coming back. Aunt Violet, in particular, was just perfection. Though I did love seeing the setting and seeing how things changed over time as the world moved on from the old ways to the new. While my tastes do include a lot of sci-fi and fantasy, a compelling story from any genre can captivate me just as well. So, what were those 2 anime I've already watched, and what did I think of them? The second one I watched was Death Note. I honestly can't remember what made me try it. Obviously, it's one of the most well-known and influential modern anime stories, to the point where even though I was barely aware of the anime scene at the time, I heard tons of discussions about it and eventually caved and gave it a go. And as you can probably imagine, considering my love for dark and twisted psychological thrillers like Seven and Shutter Island, I absolutely loved Death Note too. It's a fascinating thought experiment on justice, corruption, power, and morality, and the way it built up to the intricate battles of wits between the 2 geniuses at the center of the story was so satisfying. But the first anime I ever watched was Fullmetal Alchemist, and it's one of those favorites which I've revisited time and time again over the years. It has a brilliant balance of all the things I enjoy the most: fantastic world building, intriguing mysteries, exploration of philosophical questions without shying away from darkness and trauma, action scenes which test the characters' wits as much as their strength, an epic tale which feels deeply personal, and of course nuanced and lovable characters with realistic relationship at the heart of it all. After my experience with both of those, Fullmetal Alchemist especially, I've always had the thought in the back of my mind that there must be more out there which would be just as good, and that the hard part would be finding them. Which leads me to one final point of reference. You see, at the start of this video, I kinda told a little lie, one of omission more than anything else. I have only ever finished 2 anime series. I do really want your suggestions. I have talked about all of this a bunch of times on stream, and while people always give me tons of recommendations, I have struggled to know where to start. But eventually, my chat came to a consensus. There was one series which they all seemed to agree that I should try before any of the others. As I'm writing this, I'm about halfway through Frieren, and I absolutely love it. The setup is brilliant. By starting at the end of the typical fantasy epic, it takes all those well-worn tropes and weaves them into a rich background which it adds nuance to throughout all those poignant flashbacks, and asks such a clear and compelling question: what happens next? It does a fantastic job of showing how aloof Frieren is from the world at first, and it really hits home how her perspective is so different from everyone else's. And as she slowly begins to change, every step along her journey adds depth to her and her companions, both past and present. I love that it leans into that reverence for quiet moments that I appreciate so much in Ghibli films, and the way it shows the passing of time through those sequences is beautiful. Its gentle melancholy, its quiet and reflective pacing, and its focus on deeply human emotions despite the inhumanity of the protagonist are a joy to behold. It was absolutely the right place to start. Which leads me back to the main question: where should I go next? I have no idea, but I can't wait to find out. While I've tried to give a good overview of what I like, it's of course only a small snapshot and doesn't even mention so many favorites. I couldn't even fit Quentin Tarantino in anywhere, for example, even though I love his films. If you have any questions which might lead to better suggestions, I'll absolutely answer them. And if people are interested in experiencing my anime journey, I'll share my thoughts along the way. Until next time!